Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, September 13th, 2024. This is The Excerpt. Today, could authorities have done more to prevent this month's school shooting in Georgia? Plus, Trump says he won't debate Harris again. And the Surgeon General's latest public health warning is about parenting. The FBI got a tip that might have helped prevent the Georgia high school shooting earlier this month. And the investigation offers insight into how such clues are handled. I spoke with USA Today domestic security correspondent Josh Meyer to learn more. Josh, thanks for hopping on today.
Happy to be here, Taylor.
So Josh, would you just tell us about this meeting that happened between local sheriffs and this father and son? Why did they show up to the house in the first place, and what did officials learn on that day?
About 15 months before the shooting, the FBI received a tip, actually from three separate sources, that there was somebody threatening to shoot up a school, and they included photos of guns, including an AR-15 rifle. And so they tried to figure out exactly where the threat was coming from. They traced it to some internet IP addresses, and they sent the tip to the cops in Jackson County, Georgia. That prompted two investigators to go to the house of Colin Gray to speak to his 13-year-old son, Colt, because he'd been tied to one of the IP addresses.
Was there any follow-up, Josh, after this meeting at the father and son's home?
Taylor, that's what we're trying to figure out. And as far as we can tell, and as far as the sheriff's department is saying, they conducted a fairly short interview there with the dad and with the son on that day. And then one of the investigators, a guy named Daniel Miller, called the dad back to ask him some follow-up questions. And as far as we can tell, that was it. You know, they forwarded their information to the FBI. They released under Freedom of Information Act requests some of those reports, but the reports are very rudimentary, and they do raise a lot of questions about whether the cops asked enough questions and whether they had the potential to intervene almost a year and a half before the shooting.
Josh, I'm curious about what experts criticize here specifically. You know, these sheriffs mentioned something called an agency assist report they were filing for the FBI. That makes me wonder, was there any breakdown in collaboration between federal and local agencies? What do experts say on this, and what else do they criticize?
So I talked to a woman who used to be in charge of the FBI's active shooter program. And so she's, one of the world's experts on this, and she now runs a program designed to stop school shootings. And she said that it's proper protocol for the FBI to pass along these tips to local authorities because they're the ones that can actually do the investigations. They can arrest people and so forth if they deem something as a threat. But the local cops, as this woman, Catherine Schweit, also said, a lot of these local authorities are not very well equipped to ask the right kind of questions. There's no real template for what they should ask. And they just asked a lot of basic questions. They asked if the son used Discord, which is the social media app on which the threats were made, if there were guns in the house. When the dad said, yes, there's guns in the house and we use them for hunting, they never asked if there were any AR-15s or that kind of assault rifle that was mentioned in the threat. They never went in the house to check. Maybe they would have needed a warrant. I'm sure they would have, but they didn't really drill down on how many guns were at the house, what kind of access the kid had, whether he had any significant emotional problems. So again, it's easy in hindsight to question these guys, but I think it raised some bigger issues about whether local authorities are really equipped to kind of do these investigations.
What do some of these solutions look like to try and prevent the next mass shooting?
I think there's solutions potentially up and down the line. This former FBI agent, Kate Schweit, one of the things she suggested was that not too long ago, there were no real templates for how to approach a domestic violence investigation. So when you'd show up at the house and the wife would say nothing happened, but you would see bruises on her, or you could tell she was afraid, nothing would happen. And then they developed these protocols and laws saying that if you see any evidence of abuse, even if the victim denies it, that you should proceed and investigate further and take people into custody. So she's recommending that maybe there's kind of some template, education, and so forth, so cops do know what kind of questions to ask in situations like this, because it's happening more and more. We also identified some questions about whether the school did enough. The kid, who's now been charged with murder, did say that he was bullied a lot at this school. He did say that he'd been seeing a counselor about it. So the question is, did the cops then talk to the counselor, see if there were any emotional problems? And also, did they talk to the FBI and see if the FBI could help further investigate these tips? Because at the end of the day, when the police left the Gray's house, they didn't know who made the threats. So do you just walk away from it, or do you continue to investigate until you can really nail down who made those threats. And I think the FBI probably has some questions to answer in regard to that as well.
Josh Meyer with a great breakdown for us, as always, covers domestic security for USA Today. Thank you, Josh.
My pleasure, Taylor, as always.
Former President Donald Trump attacked Kamala Harris as a communist, promised to remove taxes from overtime pay, and doubled down on unfounded, dramatic claims of migrant crime during lengthy remarks at an event in Tucson, Arizona last night. The former Republican president held his first post-debate campaign event where he recapped his recent debate against Harris and unveiled his latest proposal aimed at addressing voter frustrations with the economy. Meanwhile, in other Trump news, he said yesterday that he won't debate Vice President Kamala Harris a second time. Making his announcement in a Truth Social post, Trump blamed both Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden. Trump and Biden faced off in June before the incumbent dropped out of the race and Harris ascended to the top of the ticket. Harris's campaign called for another Trump-Harris debate just minutes after the Tuesday debate ended. Other Democrats have accused Trump of reeling from polls showing that Harris won the debate handily. Citing 3 national polls and 1 swing state poll, ABC News 538 reported that 57% of debate watchers nationally said Harris turned in the better performance, while 34% said Trump did. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court yesterday rejected Trump's request to freeze a court ruling that allows his New York hush money criminal sentencing to go forward on November 26th. The ruling at issue came from federal trial judge Alvin Hellerstein, who said he would not remove the case from the hands of New York trial judge Juan Merchan and block Trump's upcoming sentencing. The court said it was denying Trump's request in light of the sentencing delay he has already gotten. Trump was initially scheduled to be sentenced September 18th, but earlier this month, Judge Merchan granted his request to push the date back past the election. And finally, a Georgia judge yesterday threw out 2 of the 10 criminal charges against Trump that had remained in his election racketeering case. You can read more about that with a link in today's show notes. A state judge overturned North Dakota's near-total abortion ban yesterday, making the procedure legal in the Republican-led state. Burleigh County District Judge Bruce Romanek ruled that the abortion ban, which went into effect after Roe v. Wade was overturned, violates due process protections under North Dakota's state constitution. The judge wrote, quote, "The North Dakota Constitution guarantees each individual, including women, the fundamental right to make medical judgments affecting his or her bodily integrity, health, and autonomy in consultation with a chosen healthcare provider free from government interference," unquote. The state's attorney general plans to appeal the ruling, and though the order will make abortion legal in the state, the nearest clinic is still in Minnesota. The Surgeon General's latest public health warning says parenting may be hazardous to your health. I spoke with USA Today personal finance reporter Daniel DeVise for more. Howdy, Daniel.
How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for hopping on the Excerpt today. So this really stood out to me, Daniel. Tell us about this Surgeon General health warning over parenting.
Yeah, this is, of course, the organization that put out the dangers of smoking and alcohol and stuff. And their latest public health warning is about parenting. And it basically says that parents have reached a really high level of stress. A lot of it's financial, which is why you're hearing a personal finance reporter talking about it. And the takeaway, the thing that made me want to write a story is right at the top of the report, it says 2/5 of parents now say that on most days, and I quote, "They are so stressed that they cannot function."
Wow. So I want to get to some of the specifics you outline here in the piece in a second, Daniel. But have we heard from parents? I know you're one of them, Daniel, and child care advocates after this warning.
Before and after. I mean, we at USA Today have been writing about this stuff. The child care desert. Child care has gotten much more expensive and also harder to access. So people are on these crazy wait lists. We all know anecdotal stories that more and more both parents, both partners are working full time, which was not the case in the 1960s. A lot has changed, and all of this is pushing people to wait longer and longer to have kids. So that's all the backdrop.
Yeah, so let's break down some of these specific issues. You mentioned childcare prices, they're on the rise. How bad have these gotten? Just how big of a stress is this putting on American parents, Daniel?
I think childcare might be the biggest thing. My wife and I struggled with it ourselves. according to reports, this is not part of this study that I'm writing about, but the average household pays about $325 a week on childcare, which is about 20% of the weekly income. Another report I found said the average family spends about a quarter of household income on childcare. And in this report from the Surgeon General, I think childcare comes up as maybe the biggest single source of stress. And another piece of this, which is also in the Surgeon General's report, is that parents are providing more childcare themselves directly to their kids.
Well, and that leads me to my next point here, Daniel. You know, parents do have just all kinds of more demands, I feel like nowadays, maybe compared to past generations. What are some of the many, many things that they're juggling in this era?
If you go back to the 80s, moms especially work a lot more, several more hours a week. And this on average, so there was a lot of moms that weren't working at all in the 80s. But dads also are working a little more than they were then. And then childcare delivery is also more prevalent. So your typical mom and your typical dad is both spending more hours working and spending more hours delivering childcare on average than like their own parents were. And then you can start to get into the why. And some of that even gets to the pandemic, the fact that it's easier now for parents to provide their own childcare to their kids.
Another thing I don't think we've brought up here, Daniel, that's clearly different from even a generation ago is the proliferation of technology and social media. What new challenges do these bring for parents?
I don't think anybody would disagree that social media, and you could blame whoever you want, but there's a whole bunch of these sites, they're quote unquote hijacking children's brains, monopolizing their time, isolating them from loved ones, amplifying mental health issues. And that's clearly connected to this sort of mental health crisis that we keep hearing about and I keep writing about. This was an issue for me as a parent 10, 15 years ago, and it's probably even more of an issue now. And I don't think anybody has the definitive answer for how to handle technology with kids of different ages. It's just one of these insoluble problems.
I'm curious, are there governmental or policy decisions that can help stressed out parents in this moment?
The Surgeon General talks about expanding and promoting Head Start and Healthy Start, which are programs, of course, that help parents with early education and healthcare needs. I think a big thing that you've heard candidates talk about is establishing a national paid family and medical leave program. I don't actually have space for it in the story, but also the tax credit. You could make a bigger childcare tax credit than what we've had in the last bunch of years.
All right. Daniel Devise covers personal finance for USA Today. Thank you, Daniel.
My pleasure, sir.
The Pac-12 College Athletic Conference announced yesterday that it was poaching 4 schools from the Mountain West Conference. They are San Diego State, Boise State, Fresno State, and Colorado State. By bringing in the 4 schools, existing members Washington State and Oregon State will expand the league to at least 6 teams in 2026. But it still needs at least 2 more schools to meet the minimum of 8 required for league membership under NCAA rules. The Pac-12 is currently being allowed to operate as a 2-team league under a grace period until 2026, a window that allowed the league time to figure out what to do next after 10 other members recently left for more money, exposure, and stability in other leagues. Yesterday's announcement answers part of that question, with speculation now set to intensify about who the conference will add next. Still, USA Today sports columnist Dan Wolken asks in a new piece this week just how consequential this move actually is. He argues the schools have joined a new league with an old name that is going to look almost exactly like the Mountain West. You can check out that piece with a link in today's show notes. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray Green and Kaylee Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.